Navigating an SAP transformation? We get it. By day, we work hands-on with people like you across the globe. By night, we share what actually works. Welcome to Transformation Every Day with Alexander Greb and Johannes Langguth, where your complex transformation becomes clear, actionable, and achievable.
Welcome everybody. This is Transformation Every Day, expert insights and stories on SAP and beyond. I'm Alexander Greb, and today we're talking clean core. Not as a buzzword, but as an attitude. With SAP Chief Enterprise Architect Michael Sokollek, we go from strategy to execution, bust the back to standard-only myth, and unpack the 5 dimensions: processes, extensibility, data, integrations, and operations. So, if your SAP ERP feels like a basement full of old stuff, this is your therapy. Governance, guardrails, and the SAP toolchain so you standardize what's commodity and invest where you really differentiate. Ready to get from talking to doing? Lace up. Kickoff starts now.
Hamburg is doing a restart, and I'm a vocal supporter of FC Augsburg, which is the smaller Bavarian club. Yeah, so it's the number 2 in Bavaria, so that's still a great thing.
Michael, I hope you are a fan of St. Pauli. Otherwise, I have to drop this podcast.
Yeah, I was just slowly thinking about the consequences of my answer.
But he's wearing blue, which...
Yeah, so should come on. No,
we need to speak, Michael.
I'm serious. I'm seriously. I support is a tough word, right? What does supporter mean? But I have empathy with St. Pauli. I mean, I like the club, and I like I would say, generally speaking, the political attitude of things. Let me say it this way. I'm not suggesting every statement, and yeah. So in a way, I'm more. My heart beats a bit more for Hamburg, but in a way, when I think about it, it should beat more for St. Pauli.
Because they're raw and clean and pure. Right.
Correct.
Which leads us to today's topic.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because
plus attitude, and attitude is also a very good word to start with that, because we're talking a lot of attitude today. Is clean core an attitude? To start like with that.
Yeah, I would say it's an attitude. If you transfer, I'll say a common language or private language or personal language to SAP language, is like an attitude. It's a style, you could say.
And great the style to have here, or great to have your style here in our podcast. We are recording, and we have a longtime friend with us, Michael Sokollek from SAP. What's your actual job, by the way? Because you came out of enterprise architecture, you moved into the toolchain, became a Signavio. Massive person within Signavio. Then now you're back into enterprise architecture, if I'm correct?
I guess you're not looking for an official SAP job title when you ask that question?
No, I'm more looking like what is the focus of your daily business?
I would say the focus of my daily work is trying to make sometimes a bit complicated things as simple as possible to ensure that someone really not only talks about it, but does it. And that's sometimes quite a lot to ask when you think about enterprise architecture, when you think about process management, when you think about all the other, boards which are flying in the air, and to connect the dots between these different topics, and to ensure that, as I said, that customers feel enough comfortable to get things started. Because it's one thing to understand, it's one thing to consider, to ponder about it, and then there's one thing to get really started and get things going. And this is, I think, where I'm in my role as an officially enterprise architect, RISE. So I'm working with RISE customers as an enterprise architect, but whatever that now means exactly. But I'm trying to get these things real, because only when they are real, when they're really being done, then there's value being generated. Everything else, a lot of other people do, not me.
Fantastic. And we also got Johannes here.
Hey.
Great to have you
back again.
Very nice bunch to be collected here today morning. You started with a very interesting word in that context, enterprise architect. For many, enterprise architecture is still a very fuzzy word. How would you define
what an enterprise architecture in an SAP context actually does?
Well, as you said, I think the important last couple of words in an SAP context. Yeah, if you look up enterprise architecture, these days it's not anymore you use a search engine, but you use an AI. You'll get a nice and neat definition about what enterprise architecture is and why it makes sense, and why there's, I would call it a practice or discipline in companies, bigger and smaller companies, to have an enterprise architecture, to have a reflection of their IT architecture, of their capabilities, of their application architecture, of their transition from an SE to B architecture. In an SAP context, I think when I look at what requests are coming in from the customers and what my daily task and duties are, it's a little bit broader. It's trying to connect this enterprise architecture theme with our SAP landscape, with our SAP reference content, but also to have some focused topics, for example, such as clean core and methodologies that you need to apply in order to keep this enterprise architecture, let me say, alive, to optimize it continuously.
Just saying, I checked out our favorite Gen AI tool. What is enterprise architecture in one sentence? And let me quote, enterprise architecture is the strategic discipline that defines and aligns an organization's business processes, data, applications, and technology to achieve its goals efficiently and be adaptable to change.
Which is interesting.
Say it again?
Are your customers adaptable to change?
Overall, I ask my personal AI, which sits between the front of my eyes, right? I would say rather not, or not good enough. Mm-hmm. Let me say it this way. Because as you said, the definition, the way I could also say it is building a bridge between business and IT. Ultimately, IT serves business and business processes and business strategies, or company strategies, organizational strategies, and that those strategies and the processes are impacted and influenced by multiple circumstances in the world these days, faster than ever. I think it's an obvious one. You probably had this in one of your previous chats, And are organizations prepared for that? Do they have the tooling? Do they have the transparency? Do they have the organizations built up in order to cater for that? I would say rather not. This is one of the reasons why I have a lot of work to do every day, let me say it this way.
But the definition, Johannes, that you got from your favorite AI tool started in a certain way from existing processes, because you said
which is
it aligns. Right? Yeah, it aligns processes, so more or less existing or probably even legacy stuff, to architecture. It does not include the translation of strategy into architecture and processes, which I think is a elementary or a huge important element of what an enterprise architecture should do.
Yeah, quite interestingly, it starts with a strategic discipline, but what it does from a job, from a content perspective, seems very operational, and I wouldn't agree to this definition, by the way.
Same here.
It lacks the design imperative that, in my opinion, enterprise architecture should have, right? Especially in the 2B segment. Here, it's about aligning something. Actually, in my opinion, it's enterprise architecture should create the future based on the organizational scopes. And processes are a big part of that, obviously.
There's a little bit of a solution architectural bias in that definition.
Yeah, I think that different type of architects, the business architect, the solution architect, the IT architect. And then with that word again, we answer the question. I'm trying to make from strategy to execution in the shortest words. So I think there's a lot of strategic elements in that one, because you're trying to build up an enterprise architecture, application architecture that considers the future, let me say, of the organization, the future needs. Not necessarily understanding all of the details of the past, but at the same time, you need to bring it down to an executional level. So it's not just in an ivory tower, some sort of definition, but that you try to live it up and run the transformation.
Yeah. So I just gave feedback. I said, that's nonsense, be more strategic. And the answer is enterprise architecture is now a structured approach to align an organization's technology, processes, and capabilities with its business strategy. Well, we're getting closer there.
For the rest of the day, Johannes will train the model.
Once I'm done, you're going to get super precise answers out of that one. I swear.
Nice one. But the definition is quite important, because we are talking today about clean core.
And clean core is one of the words that when you had to do with SAP and looked into SAP webinars and communication of customers, you stumbled a lot about clean core. And that's what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about the dimensions, why it's necessary. And Michael, if you would, and we ask again for a definition, if you would have to define what clean core is all about, what is this for you?
Yeah, I'm now a little bit nervous because I'm thinking I'm getting testified with the answers. But
no Bible here.
What's that?
No Bible here.
No, okay, good. Let me answer the question. I mean, I think, as you said, stumble is, I think, a good word. A lot of people stumble, right? A clean core is something which is around since many years. Actually, 2017, I think 2018, it was first mentioned by our former CTO at Tackett, where he was talking about keeping the core clean. And that has a background. The background is that if you also, maybe you want to use the famous Gen AI, there is no standard terminology in IT that says there's a clean core, right? There's a lot of things where SAP has a version of it, but there's something around in the market. But clean core is something very specific. And the reason I think to everybody who's listening is very obvious, that the ERP ECC S/4HANA system these days allows full flexibility. You can literally do whatever you want. You have full transparency into the source code. If you think you want to change the table Mara or whatever kind of standard table, just go ahead, do it, right? If you by accident want to delete something in standard, you can do it. So the core itself, I mean, the essence of what you're going to buy, the software, is not protected. You need to make sure that you protect it with the governance, with the rules, with the authorizations, with whatsoever, to keep it. So that was the history.
We have to be fair. Sorry to interrupt you here, but exactly that, the kind of the freedom to individualize and to the whole platform strategy. Always said for 20 years that this is a good thing. Look, when you have this kind of software, you can do everything with that. You can individualize, and our customers were told for like 25 years, like, oh, you are so individual, and your individuality can be expressed in the system, and so on.
And you're right.
Yeah.
It was one, again, my personal view on that one. It was one of the key ingredients why SAP has become SAP as it is today. If we wouldn't have allowed for that flexibility, and I really talk about the earlier days and earlier stages back in the 90s, to do, I say now literally in short terms, whatever you want to do. So just add a new document types here, add a new table here, make a modification there. It would be very hard at these days to make the move from the real legacy world of the mainframes and individually or first kind of like IT systems that were flying around into a standard software where you not literally could develop everything that you want, but still you could develop, as we just said, a lot. So it was one of the strengths, one of the key ingredients, and from my point of view, why SAP has become so popular as it is today. But at the other side, there's always two sides of the coin, and one is the freedom, the flexibility to do things. But with that comes, let me say, I would say also responsibility. So you need to be, you have the responsibility as a partner, as a customer, to saying, hey, I have that flexibility, but I need to apply this with caution. And then to your point, I think if you don't put governance in place, for example, also the new implementation scenario, if you think about this, right, then you end up in a not so nice situation. And this is where I've been, now you ask about my past, what I've been doing. I've seen a lot of customers sitting in this not so nice situation. So what do I mean that? When I started in 2015, first time talking about S/4HANA, and they're talking about simplification and readiness checks and compatibility scope and all these things which are still around after 10 years, interestingly enough, then customers were getting a little bit, let me say, nervous because it meant change. And they said, okay, how can I now run such a big and major transformation like an S/4HANA transformation and have no transparency about what I've done in the system? Because the flexibility of making changes to an ERP system had another, let me say, downside, that there's typically no structured requirements collections. What do I want to change? Why do I want to change it? What is the value of changing it? So I'm not saying no one has ever documented anything, but if today we would go to a customer and saying, hey, what have you done? Why have you done it? Do you still need it? Everybody would have said no, that was before my time. Mr. Meyer left the company. I don't know anymore.
Yeah. But what you're describing is basically applying standards, right? So I want to be a little bit provocative here, Michael. Would it be right if I say clean core is just another fancy word for back to standard?
Hi there. Quick break for a short message before we go right back to the episode. Enjoying the insights and stories on transformation every day? Want to make sure you never miss an episode packed with practical tips and best practices from the SAP world, featuring conversations with some of the most interesting people in the SAP universe? Then hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform, whether it is Apple, Spotify, or any other you use. And if our podcast brings you value, we would be incredibly grateful if you could leave us a 5-star review and share it with your friends and colleagues. Your support means the world to us. Thanks so much and happy listening.
No, I would say, to answer that question, short, no. Because it is more than back to standard. It's no more than back to standard, because standard implies very much, I think, a view on process and extensibility, the way I hear it at least. And I mean, if you let me maybe make that little additional comment, going back to what I said earlier, when we talked first about clean core at SAP, it was about extensibility. What has happened then? And when I say then, over the past years, we widened the definition of what we understand as clean core, how we define clean core, how clean core is being defined. We talk here about dimensions or principles. Let me say it's just aspects. And there's the aspects, just to name it, for those who haven't listening in and have not had that kind of like insight, is processes, it's extensibility, it's data, integrations, and operations. And when you now ask me if it's back to standard, then it is looking into the process extensibility dimension and understanding, okay, what do I have done in the past in terms of extensions, and how can I go back to standard? So, and that's one element, but it's an element of someone who has already an unclean core, who has already made enhancements. And obviously, there's a lot of customers who are in the move of S/4HANA, and big customers with complex landscape who, for example, saying, I reapply SAP, I reinstall SAP, I go back to zero, let me say, and do a new implementation. And yes, they also have some kind of back to standard notion, but they have also a new implementation notion. So there's more than back to standard. There's 5 dimensions. There is a keep clean and a get clean. The get clean is where back to standard comes in. Remove the old stuff. Theme, there's multifacets. That's probably why the topic is not so easy, even though it seems so easy when you just say clean core.
Yeah, I mean, we in the preparation, of course, we spoke about that already, and we on purpose decided to start with the process aspect, because I believe that's one of the most underserved elements. Oftentimes, people talk about the extensibility, so the ABAP side of the house, and think about, okay, how can I build proper extensions? So, and I think, Alex, we think we should cover in one episode more like zoom into the extensibility side and what does it mean now. I think there have been quite some additions that have been done by SAP that we could discuss about. But
exactly, Michael, we will definitely split it. Because it makes sense.
One question. I hear customer saying, hey, I have a clean core. Is that possible? Can I say I'm clean now?
I wish. I wish. Like many things in the world, it's not a binary thing. I mean, there's a few binary things, like 0 or 1. A clean core is not such a thing, right? I mean, you can strive to have a clean core or to have the cleanest possible core in your organization, but you will never have a clean core. That's and I mean, again, how would you measure a clean core? So, then I need to elaborate a little bit on that one. I mean, there's 2 elements when you think about clean core that I think is important to have an understanding of that. I mean, when you think about clean core, the way we now work with customers, or I work with customers, on 2 elements. One is the governance and maturity you need to set up in order to have a clean core. So do you have all the right practices in place to protect the core? So if we would go off to a customer and would ask, hey, how do you handle, and I just give one example, how do you manage process deviations in a fit to standard workshop? And the customer says, well, not at all. I mean, and again, simple examples, I just accept the demand from the business to have new document types and I create them. And if I do a rollout, every time I do the rollout, I create new document types because there could be a legitimate reason to have a new document type. That's obviously not the clean core. So that wouldn't give a very high rating in our personal observation. We would say, hey, you should challenge that. Is there value it? How many document types are reasonable? What's an industry standard? So there's one side, even though it's not a yes or no answer that I can give you, where we would go into the individual dimensions, such as the process dimension, as I said, and see has the right things being set up? Has people been educated to do it? Then there's the other side of the house where we're going to measure, where we have KPIs, where we can really look into, let me say, the maximum cleanness. So saying, okay, how many requirements did you capture in the workshops? And have you evaluated them whether they are clear? So they're data-driven insights. And there are an assessment of what we call governance and maturity. To what does it lead? It leads to transparency. It will not lead to that you have a clean core. Like you're saying, I don't know, try January, I drink no alcohol. That's 100% no alcohol in January. That's clear. You can achieve it. But a clean core is nothing you can achieve. If you come to an organization, I think we're living in the reality, and you do a rollout, and you're in a certain industry, and you need a modification, one single modification, because there is something that is really required in the country, and there is no API. What are you going to do? Do you stop the whole project? No. So you try to minimize the deviations to the lowest possible degree, but you will never be 100% clean, but you should be as clean as it's possible within your organization, setting up the right governance.
I like where you're going here, and you say, hey, we eliminate document types, or we avoid too many new document types being created that are not covered by standard functionality. And I want to go back to the initial definition of enterprise architecture, where we speak about efficiency. And a lot of businesses generate, in their opinion, efficiency by moving away from standard. So being again a little bit provocative, would it mean if I go clean, I kill my efficiencies and just focus on the effectiveness? So not just doing the right things right, but only doing the right things?
No, definitely not. I mean, even if I would say yes, it wouldn't matter because it's not realistic. At the end of the day, I'll talk to customers and if it's an established process, and now we're in this back to standard transition, you do not do something like this against the business. You do it together with the business. So you do have to have a mindset that there is a certain process area. Again, simple example, where anyway there's a lot of pressure on the business. I make, again, example, lowering the procurement costs. And now you ask yourself, okay, how can I achieve that? And at that moment, you obviously look into all the great technologies. I'm not using the famous technology that's probably mentioned in every podcast with the 2 letters, right? But you're saying, hey, how can I rethink my process? And at that moment, you start to intelligently, with empathy, challenge what has been built maybe 20 years ago. This little background report, this little ALV, this little whatever kind of But you need to take the business on board. Otherwise, as you said, you will kill what they have and you will not get acceptance and you will not get adoption. So this is like many things, you do together with the business or you better leave it. Which is also one of the things when you asked about, and we talked about this already, about what is clean core? Is it extensibility? Where does it come from? No, extensibility plays a major role, obviously, but that is not the first thing we put on the list of the dimensions. And it's not what's the better dimension or what's the better principle, but we start with the process dimension. And if in a process you come to the conclusion, back to your point, Johannes, that an extension is needed and adds value to the organization for whatever reason, then that is okay. And then that should be done. It's one of the myths, right? It means no extension, it means no modification, it means nothing. I mean, not in my world that I live in, but trying to challenge your overall organization to what is really adding value. Because, if I may say that, the money is limited and the time is limited, and organizations can make a choice. Do they try to optimize every single individual process, or do they rather trying to saying, hey, here are certain boundaries where I accept that the process is not picture perfect for me, but I spend the money rather on other processes where I can differentiate myself instead of like trying to optimize simply everything for the sake of having it optimized or have a better efficiency.
But that's exactly the reason why, for example, I do in my projects, or we have as CBS, for example, the clear paradigm when you go into this kind of discussion. Yeah, of course, you want to be fit to standard, but we are aware there are full necessary deviations, which is perfectly fine. The question is which one, yeah, and to which kind of extent. And the easiest way to go there, and it's the by far most outcoming way, is if you want to have a deviation, give me a business case for that. Yeah. If it's just like, hey, I've always worked like this and I want to have something like a radio button up there and so on, this is not acceptable. Yeah. This is not a justifiable deviation. But if there's a business case for that, yeah, perfectly fine. And with that, you really are able to bring that discussion back into the let's be individual where it's absolutely necessary, where it fits to our strategy, where it fits to our necessities, but it happens in our differentiating processes, not necessarily in our commodity processes.
Alex, how does that align with your business model as a partner? Doesn't it, like, from a partner perspective, I think you also live by sizes of the project. Say, if you have many deviation, my hypothesis would be that you also generate revenue by realizing those deviations. So I would be interested.
I think our business model should be the same, like, for example, good doctors, and the exclamation mark is at good doctors. Yeah, because of course a doctor can explode his revenue, yeah, by pumping his patients full of medicines and chemicals and so on. In the end, the person just simply dies. Yeah. I think it would be an absolute misuse of our position as partners if we would act like this, if we would say, like, okay, now this and there and an additional thing that the customer does not need. A good SAP implementation partner is fully, in my opinion, is fully dedicated, yeah, to bring the maximum of value with the minimum of deviations, to have this kind of clean core at the best possible way implemented. Like Michael said, the clean core topic is not really new. Yeah, we always had it in the past. What we did not have really so much in the past was the governance to fulfill the kind of deviations to standards that at the time back then already existed. Yeah, to have something like keep the core clean, make your individualization in a sidecar. This was possible already 20 years ago, but almost nobody did it. Yeah, because the awareness was not there yet, in my opinion. And this is my opinion where we have to be fair, of course, that of course we see many customers who now are in a kind of a dead end. Yeah, they individualize so much that their systems are so highly inflexible, yeah, that it's almost impossible for them to do the next step. And I have customers where I know that, and it's what they say, like, listen, we are talking now for 5 years about how to move to S/4HANA, and we do not have our case, not for the value reason. We know what kind of value it would bring, but we are unable to do the next step, yeah, because our own system, the where we start from, is so highly modified that it's for us almost impossible to do anything else than a greenfield. And this is something which is, in my opinion, a huge risk for customers. It's like when you have, for example, a house and you put all the stuff you do not need in the basement. You put it for years and decades and so on. The kids grow up and all the clothes that they do not need anymore, you put it in the basement. You cannot move to a new house based on what you have in the basement like this. Yeah, and this is exactly the same thing. I think what we have to understand is that the individualization aspect is in itself right, but we have overdone it in the past and come now to a point where we realize, okay, we have to correct. We have to correct the way we do our projects. We have to correct the way we approach things, and the clean core is a way to do that.
That was a very long answer.
I always do long answers.
I mean, don't get me wrong. In the end, I do agree, right? Like, I think we're all aligned here. It's it's an outcome focus, but still, I would also be interested to hear what you think about this, Michael. I think in the end, a lot of SAP implementations are driven by partners. And I would want to understand, how do partners gain value from Clean Core? Because like we all agree we should do the best thing for the customer, There is no objection from my end to this. But in the end, it's also hard business, right? You have to, like, if you are a consulting practice, you have to sell days, full stop. You're not going to get a clap on the shoulder and say, hey, thumbs up, you've done the best fit to standard, but sold, I don't know, 10,000 less days.
The point is,
like, how does that, Michael, do you see that happening in the market, that there's a shift in mindset? And Alex, to you, I would be interested how you guys do that.
Let me say it this way. I see where you see the contradiction, and I would not neglect that I see these issues in reality. I wish there would be a change. Let me explain why. I mean, yes, you can be, let me say, a little bit, short-sighted, and you say, I have here my implementation project, and I try to get, in the old days, maybe still in these days, we call it RICEFs, get a couple of RICEFs, have a couple of developers somewhere sitting in the world for, I don't know, what kind of euro rate, 250 euros per day, developing something, like the last 10 years they've developed. Maybe they've their little templates, and you just do a copy and paste. So you maximize your potential revenue out of this initial project. But what does it mean? I mean, do you have then a necessarily happy customer in terms of project duration, in terms of adherence of the budget of the project? I don't think necessarily. And we're living in days and times where everything is almost daily changing, right? And there's lots of things you can do and you should do as an organization where there's a shortage, let me say, of skills in an organization. Yeah, for example, we have the famous AI topic. Yeah, but put the AI in reality is something different than having on a technology stack. You need to have data. You need to have understanding of the processes and so on. I think where the problem arises is that the skills are moving slower, let me say, than the need for change. So you still have a lot of people who are being skilled in terms of, for example, for ABAP, right? To make a pragmatic example, but they don't have the skills in terms of like how to apply AI and ABAP and BTP. And so this is a little bit, I think, where the ask goes, that everybody has to educate in order to drive that one. So to, again, make the summary in short, I think there's not a contradiction. There is enough to be done, but it's just something different that has to be done. And we, with Clean Core, trying to prevent that just things are being done because there are resources available and because it hasn't been done like this the last 20 years, to develop SAP GUIs in SE51, for example, where actually no interface is required anymore because it's AI-based anyway. And that is a big jump from the past into the present, into the future, that I'm seeing.
I fully agree with you, Michael, because in my opinion, the perspective of customer experience, for example, is something which in the business of SAP implementations by far comes too short. Yeah, nobody talks about, hey, an SAP implementation has to be a joyful thing, a pleasant thing, and so on. SAP implementation, SAP projects for everybody are always like a visit to the dentist. Yeah, this is something you have to do, and it's quite hurtful, and let's get over it, and probably it gets long and expensive and hurtful and so on, but we will be happy when there will be the go live. Yeah, and I think this is horrific that it has become like this. And
it's because you're so exhausted when you reach the final line, like on a marathon, that you say, I never will do this again, right?
Exactly. But, and that's also why when you talk to many customers, who want to do now, for example, a brownfield, it's in most cases because they're still like shell-shocked veterans from their first SAP implementations, where they say like, this kind of ASAP greenfield, nothing like this ever again, in my life, And that's why the business model of SAP partners should be outcome focused, looking at, we will do an implementation which is effective, which is efficient, which is something where the customer gets value out, and the customer wants to do, in the best case, the next implementation right after this again. This should be the business model of SAP partners.
It's continuous. That's what I meant. It's not you
recurring.
Exactly.
Recurring, I think, is the headline, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I want to touch on two things that you mentioned. You asked me earlier on about my job description, and this question is now pondering in my head, and I would every time give a different answer. I think I would be a coach, right? coming back to your medical example, I mean, what we're trying to have with or establish a bit more forceful, let me say it this way, a more prescriptive is, hey, there is things, we call them dimensions. In each of the dimensions, there are things you should do, like process deviation management, for example, and this is what you should do. So this is if you go to a physiotherapist, these are the things that he will tell you that you should do in order not to get a back surgery in 3 years' time, and it's all too late. And sometimes when we look at SAP systems, you feel like it's all too late because you cannot identify SAP and non-SAP anymore because everything is put together. That's the one thought that I had. So think about myself, or think about also the role as a partner, to Johannes' question, as being a coach. A coach is not always the friendly one who says, yeah, come on. Yeah, 1 time per week sports, 10 minutes will definitely do the trick. No, you have to also say, hey, for what you want to achieve, for what your problem is, you need a little bit more. Sort of like time to be spent. And the other thing that you touched on is that this is something that you have to establish top down as the guardrails in a project. And I mean, this has also been, you said, this is not new. No, clean core is not new. It's a summary of things that if you would ask individuals over the last 25 years, when was a project successful, they would tell you a lot, 50, 60, 70, 80% of the way how now we define clean core. And how we put this, I mentioned this in this, what we just recently launched, governance and maturity assessment, where we ask detailed questions, right? Challenging ourselves and our customers. So it's not new at all. It's just a nice and neat compilation of things that you should do, like the 5 golden rules when you implement S4HANA. That's one of the things we also put together. It's things that you really should consider and make, part of your project guardrails as much as possible. I think that's what we are doing here. And that's what, I'm working on with my customers.
Doesn't that also come with a risk, Michael? I mean, I see the value that comes with it from an SAP/implementation side. So I'm not disagreeing. But if I would be now a business person and, I don't know, I get my beloved extensions, workarounds, way of doing, I don't get it realized. Wouldn't I be, inherently motivated to get myself a little bit of shadow IT piece of applications using my maybe credit card and do a little customization on my own with, I think in the old days they were calling it no code low code. Now they would say it's an agentic AI thing, but wouldn't I be motivated to get my own stuff realized somewhere else and then just maybe use bulk uploads in the system?
Yeah, I mean, every change that you introduce without intelligence and empathy, that's the way I would say it, is a risk. So what do I mean by that? Maybe speaking of practical experiences, I mean, this clean core thing has 5 dimensions. Does a customer apply all of the 5 dimensions, goes from 0 to hero? No. He chooses and pick where we jointly, and it's very often process extensibility, where we believe there is the biggest value in it, but there's also the visibility that the change can be executed. And then we try to do incremental steps. And also it's not the goal that every organization I'm working with has the same way of handling process deviations. If you are a 500,000 organization, 500,000 employee organization having a multi-single instance, you need to apply a couple of different rules than if you are 20,000 or 10,000. So it is a right sizing. That's again to your binary question, is there a clean core? No, and I try to also say no, there's no. And the things that customers implement as governance rules is also not the same. Yeah? So in my role, I'm trying to figure out what is the right thing to do and do as little as possible, but as much as possible to come to a result, like with the process efficiency. I'm not saying don't be process efficient, but don't just develop everything to be a little bit more efficient. The other one is you need to sell things. You need to sell everything, right? Everything you need to sell again and again. And you need to sell the value. If there's no value, people will not give you a top-down mandate in these times to do it. With your bulk uploads and with your shadow ID, I mean, this is ironically exactly what happened, because the systems which are so undocumented, where you don't know what are the processes, what did I enhance, what are the owners, who are the decision makers. When business comes and says, I need something, And again, simple example, I'm not saying it's always exactly the case. SAP IT says, sorry, we have a 2 years release cycle. We don't do minor release updates. We don't know the impact. Can you come back in half a year's time? What happens? The check card was being used and saying, no, that's too late. We have a business issue. We have business. We have issues. We need to fix them. And that kept the thing growing. Then you download a couple of data, you play a little bit around, everything is messed up. At the end, you don't trust SAP anymore because the MAP run is 50% done outside of the system in an Access database with some fancy algorithm that Mr. Meyer or Bob Smith developed, who left the company, by the way. I mean, that's where you end up. Whether it's a new technology, where it's bulk upload, low code, no code, AI agentic, the principle stays the same. You lose control. And if you believe as a person who's responsible for an organization that it's a good thing to lose control, then I would be surprised. So as I said, the selling point, and I mean selling now in the positive manner of selling, not overselling it, but saying, hey, why this is important? The why question, that starts with having control. And again, not saying it's a big stop sign. Don't do anything. No, if there's a legitimate reason, do it. But try to keep things under control. That probably would be the best thing I could answer to your question.
When we look into the process area, how do you think modern tools like Signavio, LineaX, and so on has helped to gain that kind of control? Because in the past, you remember that we have always talked about standard and so on, but it was always difficult to show like what the standard is all about. And I remember it very well when a pre-sales guy, I think it was in something like 2015 and so on, when challenged by the customer. Now, okay, you're talking about standard, show it to me. Then he had, okay, this is a demo here, and the demo is a little bit different, but it's something like this that you can expect. And this is, of course, not really convincing and so on. Do you think the clean core that we are talking about and we are aiming for needed something like Signavio to be actually able to exist? And the second question, to achieve that, is something like the SAP toolchain absolutely mandatory to use?
You asked two questions. Clean core and toolchain, clean core and SAP toolchain. I think I've had double click on the process dimension in clean core, just for the listeners to say what is inside of process. It might be not transparent. And I keep repeating this on purpose. We created what we call governance and maturity assessment, where we look into the individual practices in each of the dimensions. So it's a simple model. I think I can even explain it in the podcast without having, a video or a slide. You have the 5 dimensions. In each of the 5 dimensions, you have practices. I'll give you now the example of the process dimension, but it's available for all of the other dimensions. In the process dimension, we look into the practices of enterprise architecture management, of business process management, of application lifecycle management, of organizational management, of enablement, and of process deviation management. Actually, I should have process deviation management a little bit earlier because also to reflect the importance. Anyway, it's these 6 practices. And within these 6 practices, we're saying, hey, very neutrally, first of all, what an organization should have in place. And again, it's not 100%. If you don't have it, fail, examine, not pass. But it's things that you should have. And things that you should have as an organization. And not only, and this is important to understand, not only because of a clean core, you should have a certain oversight of your business processes. I say it so politely because not every organization can afford to have an L5 process hierarchy drill down across all end-to-end processes from zero to hero. This is all a journey. But there are elements to it that you need to have in place, and you need to build this up. You need to have your North Star, and you need to keep it at a level that you can sustain it, not just build something, and then you never keep maintaining it. You throw it away, and it gets dusted like the, let me say, good old horror stories about have implemented 3 times process management. It never worked. Yes, why? Think about it. You need to put it as an organizational exercise into it, and not like 5 people running in a COE. That's okay. Bit tough talk from my side, but I hope you get the point. I don't want to offend anybody. And one element in it is obviously process deviation management. I mentioned it, that you really have an object. Now I'm being very concrete in the application lifecycle management, which is a requirements object. And this requirements object you classify. When you classify, it's a fit, it's a gap, it's non-functional. what comes out. And if it's a fit, it's really part of SAP standard. It's what you, Alexander, said. If I open up a demo system and then I have a certain configuration of my document types, that's a fit. You might have also think, I need one more payment term, just to make a concrete example, that is in your industry because of your products just spot on, you require, and it's still a fit. But if you go into, I need 15 more payment terms because, well, I need it like this and this and this and this, or maybe 100 more. Or people often know an organization who have 150 payment terms, which you never end up using, obviously, because no one understood that they exist. Then you come into the gap area. So what I'm trying to say, if you double-click on the dimensions, we end up in areas. We call them practices, areas that you typically in an organization are owned and organized by different stakeholders. Because there's not the one person who does change management, enablement. You can almost see in your virtual customers that you have in your mind, you can see the number of people being in the room. You need a pretty sizable room, depending on the size of the organization. Now comes the toolchain in. How would you, in an organization that we have in our mind now, any organization works, right, organize that? Would we have a piece of paper and a pencil to have requirements? Would we then track down the transport requests to really check whether someone said, this is a clean core requirement, and then end up modifications? This is the other side. You wouldn't. Obviously, you wouldn't. So again, double-clicking on today's reality, sure, organizations using tools and tool chains. Are they using them in an integrated manner? I would not say they do it. The customers I see, they have various tools for the various practices, and they're typically non-integrated, and then sometimes they don't even really exist. They are more ad hoc. From a maturity level, we look, is it a well-established, currently continuously improving type of exercise, or is it, yes, I can do it, but I do it ad hoc, and every time I rethink how I do it. So tools and tool chains, that was your questions. I needed to add a little bit to that. Yes, a tool chain is an important element. I would even go to that part that it's required if someone really wants to live up to it. And then if you double-click again and trying to connect the dots of SAP, and I really is important for me because we have all these random guns flying around, like there's a clean core, there's a tool chain, there's this. And sometimes I think it's super hard for a lot of people, and I would not say it's not even hard for me to really connect the dots. What did SAP do in essence? We at some point said, well, we need to think again about process. We need to think more about process than ever. That triggered an acquisition of Signavio. Why? Because we said a lift and shift of an old ECC system into the cloud, exactly the same, doesn't add value, it doesn't solve the problem. So we need to think about this part. Then, and this, I tell it a little bit my way, then the next step was, well, just to think about process, but don't think about architecture. It doesn't work either. Because the change of the old world, of the old SAP world, of the old on-premise systems, let me say, into a cloud, is an architectural change, plus many other architectural elements that are playing into. So we went into architecture. The next thing we did, and I explained a little bit SAP's acquisition strategy, but that fulfills our strategy, is to saying, hey, well, if we have the best architecture, the best processes, the best process performance measurement in place, but we cannot educate people about it and make sure that they adopt the change, what happens? They're going to, request SAP all and use the old transactions. I'm just making it up, but something along that lines. So that thing here is somehow connected to making a transformation, a business process transformation, not an IT transformation, changing things. And now you think Clean Core as being a set of principles, but not as the 5 principles. These are for me more in my personal day-to-day language, areas, dimensions. But underneath, there are these practices. And out of these practices, you should, as an organization, you as a partner, definitely will do that, put in principles. Like principles, we do not deviate from standard unless. We do keep the data clean because of this. Integration means that we do that and this, and this is our integration platform. So this all connects together. And it's not a secret. Maybe it's a secret because it's not known, but it's our strategy to saying, hey, we have the tools in place with an end-to-end tool chain, but we also have the content, let me say, in the place, the governance, the methodology with Clean Core. And that's, I think, what I like the listeners to take, that Clean Core is something that is closely tied to the tool chain, and that they think about this as an implementation guideline, methodology, principles that helps them, together with the tool chain, do good things for their organization, let me say it this way.
There was a fantastic download of how things come together. Just want to say thank you, Michael.
Thanks.
It was the longest period of time where we did not ask questions or interrupted or put in additional thoughts. Looking at the other episodes, we were always, shooting questions. But this was very interesting and very insightful, Michael. But all these things come with a lot of work, right? A lot of activities that have to be done in order to get the practices in the dimension of up to speed. So in your opinion, what's the value proposition that IT leaders should bring in, or even business leaders if you consider it a business topic?
You're right. This is unfortunately not a thing that you implement in 3 months. It's not something that you do overnight or wherever, not even in a year's time. Yeah, I'll have to be honest. That's the way I am, by the way. Try to be honest and realistic. It's something which is, and so it is used this word, is a journey. And the journey starts where the customer is today, depending on the maturity level. That's why I talked a lot about in this podcast about the word maturity. Because depending where you are, you take different steps. You tackle different of those dimensions, and get things started, and you build up your plan. And you try to make the steps meaningful enough that you see value, but you try not to make them as big that you're going to fail and that you end up in a disaster. So you need to right pace yourself. Again, some of us here are marathon runners, so you need to have the right pace in the run. It might be not a 5-minute pace, it might be a 6-minute pace, but keep the pace steady. Otherwise, you will not reach the goal. And think about this being something like a marathon. Make your plan, make your game plan on it. So that's what we're working on. Now you talked about the value. It's one of the famous questions. What do I get if I invest in here? And to double click on that, we would need to think about what that investment is into the dimensions. Is it into tools? Is it into content? Is it built into organizations? First of all, and I try not to give not you a straightforward answer, but as clean core and dimensions is not something entirely new, as we think already collectively figured out and agreed on. There is something already typically in place. So for a customer who has absolutely no requirements management and no process management doing a new implementation, I think I would be scared. So I would not associate, all of the effort and costs just for the clean core topic. Similar like for data archiving, data management. I could go into all dimensions and talk endlessly about it. So I would not start with an unconscious impression of, I need to now to invest something for clean core. No, you as an organization typically have already invested a lot, or you need to invest a lot as part of, or not a lot, or significantly into tools, for example, the toolchains for your transformation. Anyway, so now you talk about the value. And the value, if you would start to calculate them, you need to have parameters. So if we three of us would be doing a new implementation, and you would catch a lot of process deviations, and you would implement all those process deviations, maybe with some enhancements, you end up in costs in it. And that cost will make your project more complex, the project will run longer, etc., etc. So the value, if you think about the process dimension, is that you try to protect your timeline. In a new implementation project, as one example, for example, that would be one of the value dimensions we could figure out and that I discuss with customers. But it's very specific to the type of situation the customer is. Is he in a new implementation? Is he not in a new implementation? What type of, investment he has anyway taken? So that's not the answer. There's the value, and here we go. The value that it gives to the customer depends on the specific circumstances of the customers and what is invested already. I know it's a vague answer, but if I would be a genius, or maybe I need to become a genius to give you a spot-on answer that it's applicable. I only can say it got to be discussed, and it got to be discussed upfront and honestly. If you hide that topic, and I'm not doing that in concrete customer conversations, it doesn't help, because at some point of the conversation, there is an investment, particularly in the organization of the customer, required. I'm not talking so much about consultant work and about tooling. I think the biggest investment is into the organization of the customer and the people who will run it. And for that, you need to still build up the case on day one by, let me say again, I use the word selling, by selling what it is. And flip side it down, as I said. We have good example. Alex was sharing a few of customers who had not put enough focus on governance in it. So it's not good to sell something with a bad picture or something, but I think customers know the reality of what happens if you don't do these things and where they end up at. So that's a combination of, hey, what we have seen in the past is this. Yeah. And I can't predict the future because the future is the future, but you can predict what happens if you do not put in certain governance and certain tools in place, that you pretty much end in a new age, with new technologies that we have in place, exactly the same place, just with different technology. Then you have not ABAP chaos, but AI chaos, let me say it this way.
And I want to jump into that with a short message that's for me very important. When we talk, for example, about the analogy that we use with the doctor and so on, I think clean core is, when you think of the solution as a medicine, clean core is a therapy. Yeah, because when you, for example, ill, you have a cold and so on, you can take medicine, but you have to behave in a certain way that the medicine is actually able to make things better for you. Yeah, if you take something like an aspirin or paracetamol or whatever, yeah, but you continue running almost naked through snow, yeah, you probably will not get healthy again. Yeah, you have to behave in a certain way that the medicine is able to make good things. And the same is, in my opinion, is here with Clean Core and enterprise applications. Clean Core is basically the therapy, is the regimen, how you are able to keep long-lasting value in your organization with your architecture when you follow these kinds of the kind of set of rules that Clean Core implies and so on. And of course, there's no, like you said correctly, there's no black and white in there. There's, of course, a lot of gray on how to implement that kind of Clean Core regimen. But we should be clear about the basis, and we should be clear about the messages that we send out there, and how you interpret it, of course. Yeah, in your individual case is your own topic.
I agree. I'm very much thinking about my last doctor visit, which was like a coaching exercise on a physiotherapist with my daughter. And I agree. What is definitely not Clean Core is not the goal. Sometimes I see, let me say, colleagues, customers, maybe partners running around saying the goal is to have a Clean Core, like a little bit like Johannes, you asked. Can I have one Clean Core piece? But please deliver. Today, no.
In 2 hours. Clean Core,
in 2 hours.
Right at my doorstep.
Right at my doorstep. No. Clean Core is a vehicle that ends up coming also to the value question, who allows you, and sorry to use the buzzwords of agility, to come to that. But it's excelity. It's the prescription that you get from the doctor. What are the things you should look in? Look into food, look into whatever, these things, and that helps you. And also the doctor, or the coach, as I said, will look into your circumstances. He will not saying, hey, that's it. If you are 30, if you're 50, if you're 70, if you're 10 years old, it makes a difference. And if you're playing in the Bundesliga, for example, or if you're just doing no sports, also as an influence, that's exactly the case.
Absolutely agree. When we look into the topic of getting clean, of doing the steps, of saying like, okay, maybe I have something of an obesity within my architecture and so on, and I want to move there. What would be the 3 most important steps that you propose to your customers?
I make a buzzword statement. It's a good question. Maybe it's the best question. Maybe it's next to the fact that Clean Core is not in extensibility, the most underrated question in the SAP ecosystem. Because there is a lot of customers who invested a lot of money into their systems, and now we come up with a concept which sounds fantastic, but it just doesn't match reality. It's like you build a product, and it's a great product, but you have no market for it. Yeah, that's coming to the value part of it. Now, what I see that customers are doing is the following. I mean, first of all, yes, you need to have, and I try to stay at a little bit a high level, otherwise I talk for hours. Apologies, I'm a bit patient about the topic. So you're obviously trying to understand your current technical depth. So you're running tools, which you don't talk today, because otherwise, we'll take another hour on it, which talks about extensibility. Yeah, it's something which is called ABAP Test Cockpit, for example, where we have a test variant who allows you to examine your overall technical depth, let me say it this way. We have open source add-ons that a very good friend and colleague of mine, Lucas, who you might talk in the future to, we develop, which is CanCipher. For those who are not German speaking, trying to figure out what Kennzeichen is, then you have some definite added value out of this podcast. And so you try to establish the basis, because we're talking about the technical depth of these customers. You try also to do the good old things that we were talking about 10 years ago when you moved to S4HANA, trying to understand what is being used, not being used, what's hardly being used. So that's the one element. Now you end up in this huge analysis of code, not used, being used, critical code, uncritical code, and you think, oh my God, what should I do? There are tools around in the market, I've partly looked into it, who are called AI-based and to trying and promise magic. I cannot talk about these tools because I have not seen them hands-on in customer situations being applied. So I'm not saying they don't exist, I'm not saying they don't add value, but what I will now describe is a more, let me say, traditional approach where I fully believe that AI will have a major role to accelerate it, but I just want to make this little disclaimer. The next thing is you're going to do it. You start from the other side of the house. You're coming from the enterprise architecture, right where we started. You establish in your organization, and again, some customers have it, don't have it, your capabilities. I would probably start with capabilities if I think about a customer who has no content available, because capability is easier to define than end-to-end processes and modular processes, because otherwise you need a 1 or 2 year length pre-project. Capabilities, I would believe, as a starting point for what I would talk about, you can do in a very short time frame. And in these capabilities, you're trying to figure out what is differentiating, what's non-differentiating, et cetera, et cetera. There's a couple of exercises you do around them. SAP toolchain, you asked about, that would be LeanIX, that would be fact sheets, that would be our standard reference content, just to connect a little bit the dots, also on the tooling side. Now you have the two elements. You have on the one hand side, you have your enterprise architecture, business capabilities. You see where you want to differentiate. On the other side, you have your custom code. And now the funny part becomes, and I've seen customers who have very well organized their custom code, in the sense of they have development classes and they know which development class is, let me say, roughly in which capability, and they're trying to match and map these things. Very concretely, I have a customer in mind who created a new fact sheet in LeanIX, just to talk reality. And these fact sheets, they call application roadmap items. So they're saying these are areas, not a single line of code, but areas where I say I've done something new in MRP, I've something in Dunning, I have something in production planning. So they are more from the vocabulary business-oriented than technical-oriented. And they did a mapping of their custom code findings to this new fact sheet. And then they mapped the fact sheet, this application roadmap item, to the capabilities. So you're trying to make the connect from the strategic capability level to the technical level. And now these customers are sitting there, let me say, not with 100,000 lines of code, but with 200 application roadmap items, for which they have defined owners, which have a dual responsibility. They need to understand the technical depth on the one hand side, but they need to go to the business, exactly the point with earlier on the conversation, which says, okay, how does it map to my business? Because you need to bridge the gap. And this is, again, you asked about toolchain here a little bit, everything comes together, where you need to make your plan, you need to find your way. What you should not do is just look at your coding and do an analysis and then hope someone will tell you, just remove it, just do it away. You need to make the transparency of it. You need to take the prerequisites of your foundation. You need to connect them and then make out of this a conversation of these, I call it application roadmap items. I think it's a good word, where you're just saying, what do I do? Is there a standard software route that I associate to my capability? Or is this something that still differentiates me? You start challenging it. And just to close this off, funny enough, guess what happens when people are doing this exercise? They figure out there's no legitimate reason for this enhancement anymore. They say, oh, we've done that, but well, no longer required. So you go into this conversation. Again, is it an easy one? No, it's not an easy one. Does it take time? Yes, does it take time? Does it make sense to get started? Yes, makes sense to get started. And that's, again, my therapy. Sometimes it takes a bit longer to come to health, but it's a plan. And again, if you are smart, you take items which work. So you get the business buy-in, that the business people get the assignment from top down saying, yeah, do this, that makes sense. And last comment is you're trying to connect this with the strategic and the process performance. You're trying to identify where are the areas where, anyway, process performance is an issue, because, and this is also one of the underlying myths, not only always where you enhance the system a lot, you have the best performing processes. You might think it's like that because you spend the money and it hurts you a lot as an organization saying, I spent this $20,000, $50,000, $100,000, euro, whatever, in making an enhancement. It's still not good. But if you're neutrally looking at it, not very emotional, you will figure out that it's not always the case. So that's the ingredient. Yeah, sorry again for the long answer, but I try to convey a message.
No problem. And I want to enhance on what you said in the beginning with we have customers there who spend in the past a lot of time in their legacy systems. And this is in many cases one of the biggest, large stumbling stones that we have to overcome to make innovation happen. Yeah, because this kind of sunk cost bias is something which, in my opinion, it's not talked about enough, because this is a absolutely human reaction to anything which is connected with progress. Yeah, you can have it in your private lives when it's about getting rid of old stuff, and you can have it in your professional life. And what we definitely have to do is we have to talk more with our customers about these kind of strategic things, about these kinds of effects and so on, and not leave the kind of light of enlightenment to the what dimension alone and saying like, look, I tell you something about the technology. The understanding is now your part. Yeah,
agree. Think again is the word I would like to put in place for that. There's a nice book from Adam Grant about that, who may know that, where think again can save lives. Let me say it this way. That we're not quite that yet on that subject, but think again is also what makes my life enjoyable, because I can think again things again together with customers, and that's also, I would say, also a portion fun in it, even though it sounds like work.
Michael, it has been again an absolute pleasure to have you, and I can promise this will definitely not the last time. To wrap this up, where can people follow you and learn more about you?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. First of all, if you haven't connected with me, I'm looking forward to being connected. And you asked about follow-up. Yeah, you can send me direct messages if you're absolutely enthusiastic about. But watch out, in the next couple of weeks, I will do a couple of posts on these things that I've already mentioned in there around governance and maturity assessment, about how to approach it. So I try to give a quick guide, because the last couple of months have been very busy creating material. So it has been prepared in the kitchen, as a good friend says, and now it's time to bring it on the tables of my customers, but also on the tables of everybody else. To eat it, to taste it, to give feedback back to the kitchen, to try to improve the recipe. Yeah, also this is a journey. Nothing is perfect these days. But yeah, thanks for having me, and super much looking for feedback.
Thank you very much. It was great to have you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Johannes. Thanks, Alex.
Bye-bye.